In the past few days, I've been watching several videos, and I've really enjoyed them. There are some extraordinary people on YouTube, and I'm subscribed, and also some people who are subscribed to me are extraordinary people. And the fun I've been having with watching these videos has kind of enticed me to deviate just a little bit from the Civil War things that I've been doing. And I'd like to entitle this Exciting Plane Rides. And I'm going to tell you about one that I experienced. It was in 1964, in December of '64. I left New York City, and at that time Pan American had an around-the-world flight. I can't remember. Flight 1 went around the world one direction, Flight 2 went around the other, and I can't remember if it was Flight 1 or Flight 2. But it was a Pan American 707, and our itinerary was New York, London, Frankfurt, Vienna, Austria, Istanbul, which was my destination, and then Beirut, and then on around the world back into San Francisco, and then into New York. When we left New York, everything was fine, and we landed in London, no problems. And we had a slight layover in London. They had to service the aircraft. And then we took off for Frankfurt. And as we crossed the English Channel, that was my first time across the English Channel, as I looked down, I thought of the guys who were crew members on B-17s, and there I was in the comfort of a 707, and those guys were flying under extreme circumstances with people shooting at them. And I tried to put myself in their shoes, and it was impossible. There is no way that I could even comprehend what they were feeling back then. Just before we got into Frankfurt, Germany, the weather had started to turn bad as we went across the English Channel and was going into France. You could see that there was some weather in that area. So when we landed in Frankfurt, it was raining. It was December, a cold rain mixed with snow. We took on some passengers in Frankfurt, and we left Frankfurt. The next stop was Vienna, Austria. Well, shortly after the aircraft broke ground, we were in the weather. And after a period of time, the captain came on the intercom and he said, due to inclement weather in Austria, we're going to continue on to Istanbul. Well, the people that were going to Vienna did not want to go to Istanbul, so there were some unhappy campers on the airplane. So we continued. I was kind of happy because Istanbul was my final destination, and I was in a hurry to get there. So the trip continued, and the captain came back on the intercom, and he said, due to inclement weather in Istanbul, we are going to Ankara, Turkey, because we don't have enough fuel to get to Beirut. Well, now we had a lot of unhappy campers on that airplane. And being the skeptic that I am, I was thinking, well, if he doesn't have enough fuel to get to Beirut, they had a map in the back of in a pouch on the back of the seat. I had the map out and was looking at Pan American's route, and I took my handkerchief out and I started drawing arcs, And my ARC told me that we didn't have enough fuel to get to Ankara if we couldn't go to Beirut. That was my determination. So now I was becoming concerned, but I was keeping my concerns to myself. So we continued on, and what we did is we outran the weather. All of a sudden it cleared, and you could look down and see the mountains of central Turkey. And we dropped down through a couple of layers or one layer of clouds, and intermittently you could see the ground and you could see snow on the mountains. But we came into the clear. When we landed in Ankara, it was clear weather. So the plane pulled up to the terminal, and Pan American had representatives there to meet the aircraft, because the people going to Vienna, they were going to put them up in a hotel. And the Turkish government had a law that you couldn't fly within the country on a foreign flag carrier, which meant that the only way that I could get from Ankara to Istanbul is I had to take a Turkish airliner back to Istanbul. So I had already determined that I was going to get to spend a night in Ankara because of the terrible weather that had been reported in Istanbul. At this time, I had met 2 other Americans and 2 dependent wives of servicemen who were going to meet their husbands. And at this time, they were becoming really concerned, because here they were, thought they were going to arrive in Istanbul, their husbands would be there to meet them, and here they are, they don't know what to do. So one of the sergeants and myself, we told them that that we would look out for them until they got to their final destination. The representative from Pan American came up, and I said, are you going to put us up in a hotel in Ankara? And he said, no, I've got you scheduled out on a Turkish airliner going to Istanbul in 45 minutes. And I said, if Pan American won't land in Istanbul, why are you landing? And he said, the weather is bad, but we very seldom cancel our flights. Now I am really becoming concerned, and the dependents heard this conversation. So in about 45 minutes, the flight to Istanbul was called on the Turkish airliner, and they were flying an F-27. It's a Fokker F-27. If you don't know the type of airplane, it looks similar, and I think it's the same aircraft that the airborne uses, the Golden Knights, I think that's what they call themselves, that they jump from during air shows. It's that type of aircraft, which is a great aircraft. So anyway, we got out and got on the Turkish airliner, and by that time the weather had caught up with us, and it had started to rain. The weather was similar to what it was in Frankfurt, Germany, when we came through there. And the aircraft was full. The only Americans aboard were the 2 dependents, this sergeant, and myself. And we took off. And as soon as we broke ground, we were in the weather. And I mean, it was rough. And the door to the pilot's compartment, evidently the latch was defective. So every time that we would hit rough weather, the door would swing open and clang, which was kind of unnerving. We continued on to Istanbul, and I was sitting, that aircraft is a high-wing aircraft, and I was sitting right under the wing, and I knew we were getting ready to land because I saw the flaps start to extend, and then the landing gear came down, and I had my face pressed against the window because I wanted to see if I could see the ground before we hit a mountain or whatever we were going to hit, because I had never been on an aircraft in that kind of weather before. And all of a sudden, when we broke over the threshold of the airport at Istanbul, the perimeter lights were amber, and you could really see them, so they just flashed under the wing. And I am sure that airplane can land sideways. I don't know how much the gear will swivel on that aircraft. But when we came into the airport to land, if we weren't completely sideways, of course I'm exaggerating, and we touched down and taxied up to the terminal, and I told this sergeant that was with us, I said, I've got to compliment this pilot. And this elderly guy came from the captain's side of the left-hand side of the cockpit, and of course he looked elderly to me because I was not an elderly person back then. And I told him, I said, sir, I said, I want to compliment you because no one else would land in that kind of weather, and you did a fantastic job. And he smiled and said, thank you. My final destination was near a village on the Sea of Miramar, and the only way that I could get there, they did have a land route, but I was booked to take the ferry boat to the area that I was going to, where I eventually spent a year and a half. And I stayed in the Hilton Hotel in Istanbul, and the desk clerk there was telling me that he could not remember ferry boats ever being canceled. That's how bad the weather was in Istanbul in December of '64. So I was stranded in Istanbul for 3 days, and I spent 3 days walking all over that beautiful city. I saw sights that I probably would have never seen if I hadn't been stranded there the way I was. And I can remember at the time I had a fur coat and a big fur hat, and I'm sure I looked out of place, but Istanbul is a European city, and at that time there wasn't a land bridge between Istanbul and the Asian side of the Bosporus. 3 days later, the weather cleared, and I caught a ferry boat to the little village where I was going to be for a year and a half. And I spent a year and a half. Some of the most enjoyable times of my life were in Turkey. Well, that's my story. One of these days I'll tell you about being snowbound on the top of Mount Uludağ in Turkey.